Thank you, Chair. And I will also like to extend my thanks to Colonel P.K. Gautam and Saurabh Bhai for allowing me being part of this important project. My paper deals with the looking into the role of norms and identity in shaping a political actor's behavior. It argues that the norms, identity, and a belief of a political actor not only shape a political actor's behavior but also constitute the identity itself, which then in turn has a significant influence on the behavior or a policy that specific political actor pursues in international system or any political domain. This debate started in the last decade of the last century when the rational theories could not explain the behavior of states, which it should have been given its structural realism principles, according to which in the international international system, players are the rational actors and they seek security at the foremost. To problematize this structural realism, the constructivists try to fill this gap, and they try to problematize the ontology itself by questioning the structure of structural realism. And they brought in the role of political agency in that international system. Once bringing the role of political agency in international system, that means that agency has to have some identity. And if an agency has some identity, it means it will pursue the policies according to that agency, what it believes in. I'm following this trend of constructivist school of thought and trying to argue in this paper that the policy or a behavior of a political actor is indeed influenced by the norms and identities that it believes in. Constructivists define a norm as collective expectation about a proper behavior about a given identity. Though the constructivists were quite successful explaining the role of norms and identity in a political actor's behavior, where they were struggling with for some time was why these norms emerged at the first place. To this, I would argue that the chances of emerging a norm is more likely when set in principle by a powerful but legitimate political authority. And that's why I'm dealing with these two people, Aśoka and Akbar. Both these people were quite powerful, but most importantly, they were quite legitimate, which we tried to discuss. They were reflecting the socio-political structure of their polities. I also tried to maintain this balance that the difference between the ruler and its polities was not that, it was quite close to each other. That ruler did not try to be forceful to his subjects. He was trying to be reflective of his polities, and that got reflected to his policies, which I think is quite unique in Indian case. So second part, then it's interesting, then that the constructivists were struggling with this was, why are some norms more diffusive than others? Why are some norms like, for instance, use of nuclear weapons, why is it more diffusive than the other norms, like interfering in other states' affairs? To this, I would argue it will depend on two factors. One, is the norm seen generally good for a particular cause? If it is seen as a good for a particular cause, that increases the chance of its receptivity among its audience. And second, as I said, if there is a cordial relationship between norm creator, that's a ruler, and its subjects, it's likely that the subjects will receive that norm quite positively. And this brings me to the polities of these two rulers, Aśoka and Akbar, which I think was both of these were trying to be quite benign and trying to gain legitimacy among a diverse polities, which they were not in terms of identity ruling over the majority. They were having, one was, though it's said that Ashoka was a Brahman, but it's debatable whether he converted to Brahman after Kalinga or he was before, he already was believing in Buddhism. And in Akbar's case, he started this role of identity in politics. It started from the very beginning when he took over at the age of 14. I think this is very important for understanding the Indian statecraft. Our looking will make us understand Indian strategic culture like George Tenham did, which I would argue that he was explaining this Indian strategic culture from a position when the Cold War was ending, and the people were like John Mayer Schimmer were concerned about the emerging multipolarity, which realists would argue that is unstable, unlike the bipolar world. So now we have enough scholarship out there which has shown that the additional belief system and role of norms have brought about the policies of a state and its behavior are a reflection of its state identity. Every state has an identity. That means the political elite of a state, they believe in some ideas or some policies. That does not mean they are not rational, but they have some identity with them which they try to pursue then in the international system. Their policies. Indian strategic culture, I think, reflect this role of norms and identity much more than as compared to others. In fact, in Chinese strategic culture, if we discuss the Chinese strategic culture, Alistair Johnston would argue that it has two strategic cultures. One is symbolized one, according to which the state will behave like any other normal state, but it has one more strategic culture, which is operational, where it thinks that as soon as the adversary gets weaker, so the idea of use of force resurfaces. So it can eliminate as when the adversary gets weaker. But in India, I did not find any such duality of strategic culture. Here the use of force is always last resort, or maybe sometimes it's not used. For this, analyzing this theoretical formulation, I am analyzing the policies of these two rulers of India. I have chosen them for three main reasons. One, given their influence on the Indian history, politics, and statecraft. And second, their vision of ruling their subjects by peaceful means, not using force or using it as a last resort. And third, I think it also fulfills the methodological requirement. If we are able to identify a variable, constant variable, between these two rulers who are ruling apart almost 1800 years, that I think will be quite reflective of Indian strategic thinking. And I here find that use of force as a last resort is a constant variable between those two. Coming to Ashoka's rule, Ashoka's identity, as we know before Kalinga War, was quite, sometimes some would argue, was quite, was quite aggressive, like any ruler as he was. But after changing his identity, he became non-violent. We see a radical change in his policies. Now he is not using aggression against his opponents. In fact, he used a new concept. He changed the concept of victory. He calls it moral victory. And he defines it that King Priyadarshi considers the moral contest, which is the Dharma Vijay, the most important conquest. So we see that the belief system, when a belief system of a ruler changes, even by a single incident, his whole policy is being disturbed, or his whole policy is being reshaped by according to his belief system, according to his identity. Also, to reflect how Ashoka was concerned about his polity, that was quite diverse, is the use of Prakrit as language for spreading the edicts. He could have used Sanskrit, which was the court language, but he used the Prakrit, which was because it is considered the Prakrit was speaking most of the in the Ashokan Empire. Prakrit was speaking almost understandable to all people who are living in his empire. So this also reflects that how the king was concerned about or was conscious about the diversity in his that was existing in his empire. As far as Akbar is concerned, Akbar's use of force is almost on the similar lines that we find in Ashoka. Akbar tried to create a legitimate authority so that he can be viewed as a ruler of whole Mughal empire rather than being affiliated to a single particular identity, which he was aware of that he belonged to a Muslim community. What he did was to first he invited some religious Islamic theologians and asked them that you should give me a supreme position so that I can interpret some religious laws according to my requirement. In turn, your suggestion will be implemented by my empire, which could not succeed due to some reasons. What then he started to do is identify himself as an elect of God. This is what the first strategy he did. And second, he tried to create a quality what John Richards calls Tawheed Ilahi. He tried to identify himself as he is the elect of God, and every religion he does not have any religious identity. He has been chosen by Creator out there and is reflective of all religions that are existing in his empire. And that brings me to his use of force, which Dr. Adil Rashid talked about, the Sulhai-Kul. Sulhai-Kul was the concept of an idea that was reflective of all these beliefs, that all religions ultimately reflect the same thing, and all religions have to reconcile with each other to live peacefully. And when it comes to force, Akbar use of force was always last resort. In fact, unlike the Chinese strategic culture, as I mentioned, when adversary was ready to accept his suzerainty and give up any resistance, he was respectfully treated in his court. I will mention two examples. One was when Akbar started to make his political and military reforms. There was some dissatisfaction grew in some Mansabdars, Mughal officials, which started in Bihar and it crossed out to Bengal, where the Mughal Mansabdars, they killed a newly appointed governor, and they appointed new government with Mirza Hakim, which was a governor of Kabul and almost ruling the Kabul independently of the Akbarian empire. He was appointed their governor. Akbar invaded the Kabul and Mirza Hakim was defeated quite easily. But after he was defeated, Akbar did not kill him. He let him to rule the Kabul as it was. So we see the use of force is not to annihilate the enemy. It's to just dispel any threat that is there to threaten his empire. Same is the case with Mirza Jani Beg, which was the ruler of Sindh, Lower Sindh. He fought a long war between Mughal Akbar's army, almost for 15 years. But when the king was overtaken, 1592, and during this time, Akbar was advised by his courtiers that this guy is anti your empire, he is critical of you, you need to kill him. But Akbar said to them that this is not going to happen on my watch. The king, Mirza Jani Beg, was invited to court and he was treated respectfully. In fact, whole his province or principality was restored to him, and he was just let to rule his province again. This again shows the use of force, which was existing due to emperors, was the last resort. This was, as I mentioned in the paper, was the reflective of this polity of these rulers which they were ruling. This was because this was a requirement of the polity. Their polity was quite diverse, which were based on different principalities and different states. So this policy was the ruling by creating legitimacy for oneself, was the requirement for empire to get the accepted as a legitimate king. Thank you.